High in the Colorado Rockies, nestled amongst snow-laden pines, stood Moonlight Lodge, a beacon of warmth and luxury in the heart of winter's embrace, where the crackling fire and soft glow of lanterns promised comfort. Each year it drew a diverse array of guests seeking solace, adventure, or perhaps a chance encounter with destiny. Little did they know they were stepping into a real-life mystery, one that would bind their fates together. The lodge, usually a sanctuary from the outside world, was about to become a stage for secrets, lies, and a chilling crime. The allure of Moonlight Lodge was undeniable, but beneath its inviting facade lay whispers of untold stories and hidden dangers. As the snowstorm raged outside, the guests would soon discover that the true mystery was not just within the lodge, but within themselves. First to arrive was Dr. Alice Bennett, a renowned psychologist with a sharp mind.
Interesting mix of people this year.
James Thorpe, a tech titan, followed, his demeanor a mask of charisma.
Looks like a promising weekend ahead.
Natalie Rivers, an aspiring actress, and Grant Huxley, a former detective turned author, completed the group. Raymond Wells, the lodge's enigmatic owner, greeted each guest warmly.
Welcome to Moonlight Lodge, everyone. I hope you find everything to your liking.
The guests settled in, the storm outside escalating into a blizzard. Laughter mingled with the clinking of glasses as the guests enjoyed a sumptuous dinner. A sense of unease settled over the group as the storm's isolation became more palpable. The wind howled outside, a ferocious beast clawing at the walls of Moonlight Lodge.
This storm, it's unsettling, isn't it?
James Thorpe paced restlessly, his phone useless in the storm.
I can't shake this feeling. Like something's about to happen.
The storm stripped away facades, revealing the guests' raw anxieties. Despite the tension, Raymond Wells maintained an air of normalcy.
A lavish spread of gourmet dishes was laid out on the dining table.
The guests partook in the feast, their forced smiles hiding fear. Grant Huxley observed the scene, noting subtle shifts in body language. Raymond suggested a game of chess, a tradition at Moonlight Lodge. The storm redoubled its fury, plunging the room into darkness.
Don't worry, it's just a temporary power outage. The generator will kick in any minute.
Grant Huxley took charge, commanding everyone to stay calm.
We need to find a light source and make sure everyone is accounted for.
He moved through the darkness, his mind racing to assess the situation. Huxley's hand instinctively moved to his pocket, a lifetime habit of reaching for a flashlight that wasn't there. A scream, high-pitched and blood-curdling, ripped through the darkness.
Stay here, someone find a light!
He moved swiftly towards the source of the scream, his years of training guiding him. His outstretched hand encountered a body, lying cold and lifeless on the floor. A lantern cast a flickering beam of light on the gruesome scene. Raymond Wells lay sprawled on the floor, a fire poker stained crimson nearby.
Her medical training overriding her initial shock.
Her eyes wide with terror.
Huxley barked out orders, securing the scene.
We need to secure the scene. Nobody touches anything.
The murder weapon, the scattered chess pieces, the solitary black pawn, each element whispered of a killer among them.
Standing trembling. Her phone forgotten, she stood trembling.
Huxley saw fear, suspicion, and guilt in the faces of his fellow guests. The fire crackled, a macabre counterpoint to the icy grip of fear.
We're trapped here until the storm breaks. We need to understand what happened here tonight.
He began with Dr. Bennett, her composure a stark contrast to the tremor in her hands.
You were closest to Raymond when the lights went out. Did you see anything? Hear anything?
It was chaos, she whispered. The darkness, the screams. It all happened so fast.
Huxley turned his attention to James Thorpe, the tech mogul's usual air of confidence replaced with a palpable unease.
Mr. Thorpe, you were engaged in a rather intense game with Raymond just before the lights went out. Can you recall anything unusual, any disagreements, any indication that he might have been in danger?
Thorpe ran a hand through his hair, his face pale and drawn in the flickering firelight.
It was just a game, Detective, he said, his voice tight with suppressed tension. Raymond was competitive, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. He paused, his eyes darting to the chessboard, the scattered pieces a silent reminder of a battle interrupted. We were discussing business as usual, he continued, his tone clipped, as if trying to convince himself as much as Huxley. He was difficult as always. He looked away, his jaw clenched, a muscle ticking nervously beneath his eye.
Huxley, a keen observer of human behavior, recognized the signs of suppressed anger, the simmering rage that lurked beneath the surface of Thorpe's carefully cultivated persona.
Difficult how? Huxley pressed, his voice soft but insistent. Did you threaten him, Mr. Thorpe? Was there a disagreement that escalated? He watched as a flicker of something dark crossed Thorpe's face, a fleeting moment of unguarded emotion that the tech mogul quickly masked.
Natalie Rivers, her initial shock giving way to a trembling anxiety, sat huddled in a corner, her eyes fixated on the fire. Huxley approached her cautiously, his demeanor softening as he recognized the genuine fear in her eyes.
Miss Rivers, he began, his voice gentle. I understand this is a difficult time, but it's important that you try to remember anything you can. Did Raymond say anything to you? Did you notice anyone behaving strangely?
She looked up at him, her eyes wide and filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. Huxley studied her for a moment, sensing that there was more to her story. Layers of unspoken truths hidden beneath the surface of her carefully crafted persona. And in this isolated pressure cooker of a situation, everyone had a secret to protect. Lauren Price clutched a throw pillow to her chest, her breath catching in her throat.
This is all so surreal, she finally choked out, her voice barely above a whisper. 1 minute we're enjoying a lovely dinner, the next, murder. Her eyes, wide and filled with a terror that Huxley recognized as genuine, darted around the room, as if the killer's identity might be written on the very walls.
Huxley studied her for a moment, her carefully curated online persona crumbling under the weight of their shared reality.
It's important to focus on the facts, Miss Price, he said, his tone gentle but insistent. Did you notice anything unusual about Raymond's behavior tonight? Anything that might suggest he was in danger?
She shook her head, her blonde curls cascading around her face like a protective curtain.
He seemed on edge, I guess, she said, her voice hesitant. But he was always a bit intense, you know? A real go-getter. She offered a weak smile, a pale imitation of her usual bubbly persona.
Huxley's gaze shifted to the chessboard, the solitary black pawn, a stark reminder of the game they were now playing, one with far higher stakes. He knew that every move, every word, held the potential to reveal the killer in their midst. And as the storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil within the lodge, he felt a growing sense of urgency. Time, he knew, was not on their side. The silence in the room stretched, punctuated only by the crackling of the fire and the howling wind outside. Huxley, his mind a whirl with possibilities, decided to change tactics. He needed to shake things up, create cracks in the facades they had so carefully erected.
It's clear that Raymond Wells was a complex man. He had his share of secrets, his share of enemies.
He let the words hang in the air, watching for reactions, for any telltale sign that might betray a guilty conscience. Dr. Bennett, her professional demeanor momentarily forgotten, met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension.
You think one of us?
It's a possibility we can't ignore. Until we know more, everyone is a suspect.
He watched as the weight of his words settled over the group, the fragile facade of their forced camaraderie crumbling under the weight of suspicion. James Thorpe, his face pale and drawn, ran a hand through his hair, his usual air of confidence replaced by a palpable tension.
This is absurd. We're all victims here.
But even as he spoke, his eyes darted nervously around the room, betraying the fear that gnawed at his carefully constructed composure. Natalie Rivers, her initial shock giving way to a trembling anxiety, huddled deeper into her chair, her eyes wide and haunted. She had retreated into herself, her usual vivacity extinguished by the weight of the situation. Huxley, a keen observer, recognized the signs of someone battling an internal storm. As the night wore on, the storm outside raged, mirroring the turmoil within the lodge. The guests, trapped by the elements and their own secrets, retreated into themselves. The storm raged outside, a symphony of wind and snow battering the walls of Moonlight Lodge, echoing the turmoil that had gripped its inhabitants. Hours had passed since the discovery of Raymond Wells's body, each tick of the clock a hammer blow against the fragile illusion of safety. Huxley, his gut churning with a mixture of dread and determination, knew it was time. He stood before the fireplace, its flames casting dancing shadows that accentuated the grim lines etched on his face. The guests, huddled together on the plush sofas, looked up at him with a mixture of fear and anticipation, their carefully constructed facades crumbling under the weight of his scrutiny.
I've seen enough. It's time we laid our cards on the table. Please gather around. Let's end this charade.
Each word dripped with an unspoken weight, a stark reminder that their carefully constructed world of luxury and leisure had been shattered, replaced by the chilling reality of their shared predicament. One by one, they took their places around the table, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames of the fireplace. Huxley stood at the head of the table, his gaze sharp and unwavering. Mr. Thorpe, your business dealings with Mr. Wells were far from amicable. You had motive, opportunity, and a volatile temper. Don't insult my intelligence with denials. The evidence speaks for itself. Dr. Bennett, your connection to Mr. Wells ran deeper than you revealed. These are not mere coincidences. You were backed into a corner, and Raymond Wells held the strings. Section 3. The Pawn's Revenge. His gaze, sharp and unwavering, settled on Natalie Rivers, her initial shock giving way to a dawning realization. She sat stiffly in her chair, her eyes fixed on the chessboard, her gaze drawn to the solitary black pawn, a symbol of her own carefully calculated moves.
And then there's you, Miss Rivers, Huxley said, his voice softening, a hint of sympathy tinging his words. The aspiring actress, the scorned lover, seeking retribution for a past betrayal. He paused, allowing his words to sink in, watching as the colour drained from Natalie's face, her carefully crafted mask of composure crumbling under the weight of his gaze.
The black pawn, Miss Rivers, Huxley continued, his voice barely above a whisper, a seemingly insignificant piece, easily overlooked, yet capable of delivering a fatal blow. He reached out and picked up the pawn, its dark wood smooth and cold against his fingertips. You used the storm as your cover, the darkness as your weapon, he said, his voice rising in intensity, echoing the howling wind outside. You lured Raymond Wells into a game of strategy, a game he never realized he was playing until it was too late.
Natalie, her face ashen, her body trembling, finally broke. Her carefully constructed facade crumbled, revealing the raw desperation and anguish that had fueled her actions. He ruined me, she whispered, her voice choked with unshed tears. He took everything from me, my career, my dignity, my life.
Section 1. Unmasking the Mastermind. A collective gasp rippled through the room as Natalie's confession hung heavy in the air, a chilling confession that shattered the remnants of their forced camaraderie. The weight of her words, the raw anguish and desperation in her voice seemed to suck the very air from the room. Even the storm outside seemed to momentarily pause, as if holding its breath, listening to the unraveling of the night's dark tapestry. James Thorpe stared at Natalie, his face a mask of disbelief and disgust, a stark contrast to his earlier arrogance. Dr. Bennett, her initial shock giving way to a wave of empathy, reached out a hand towards Natalie, a silent gesture of comfort that went unacknowledged. Lauren Price, however, remained unnaturally still, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the confines of the room, her usual bubbly persona replaced by an unnerving blankness. Huxley, a seasoned hunter of truth, recognized the subtle shift in the room's dynamics, the way Lauren's stillness stood out against the backdrop of shock and despair. It was a dissonance, a discordant note in the symphony of their shared experience. He had seen it countless times before, the mask of innocence slipping, revealing the cold, calculating mind of a master manipulator. He turned his gaze towards Lauren, his eyes boring into hers, his voice, when he spoke, devoid of its previous warmth, replaced by the cold steel of a seasoned interrogator.
It seems, Miss Price, he began, his words slow and deliberate, each syllable a hammer blow against the fragile wall of her composure, that Miss Rivers was not acting alone.
Section 2. The Final Checkmate. Lauren's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled, the color draining from her face as Huxley's words pierced through her defenses. She flinched, a barely perceptible movement, but one that did not escape Huxley's keen observation. It was the telltale sign of a cornered animal, the desperate attempt to evade the inevitable.
What are you talking about? She stammered, her voice cracking under the weight of his gaze.
Huxley stepped closer, his shadow falling over her like a shroud. "Don't insult my intelligence with lies, Miss Price," he said, his words laced with steel. "I've seen your type before, the puppet master, pulling the strings from the shadows." He held up a hand, a single finger raised, a silent accusation that hung heavy in the air. "The boot prints in the snow, Miss Price, the ones that didn't belong to any of the guests. The ones that miraculously appeared after the power outage, leading away from the scene of the crime. And then there's the matter of your online persona, Miss Price. The carefully curated image, the witty captions, the carefully constructed narrative of a carefree travel blogger." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, watching as the blood drained from her face. He leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper, his words a venomous whisper that sent shivers down her spine. "But what your followers don't see, Miss Price, is the cold, calculating mind of a manipulator." He straightened up, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of the other guests. Lauren Price, it seems, was once Raymond Wells's trusted assistant, privy to his secrets, but somewhere along the way, Miss Price's ambitions outgrew her position. Perhaps she felt slighted, passed over, her talents underappreciated, or perhaps she stumbled upon something, a secret, a transgression that gave her leverage. He turned back to Lauren, his gaze piercing through her carefully constructed facade. "And what better weapon, Miss Price, than a scorned lover driven by a thirst for revenge? Justice finds its way." Lauren's world crumbled, her defiance broken. The truth crushed her, leaving a hollow shell. Guests watched in stunned silence, a mix of shock and relief. Dawn's light pierced the darkness, revealing the scene. Authorities arrived as the storm receded. Natalie confessed to Raymond's murder, her voice a broken whisper. Lauren, spirit broken, was led away in handcuffs. The sun rose, bringing closure to Moonlight Lodge. Justice, though delayed, had found its way.